Right, well, there's been some significant events in that last turn. Um, I realised that it might be useful for both sides to start employing their secondary batteries more because the range is so short now. And particularly in the case of the Brooklyn there, where the fire control system for the primary battery has been temporarily knocked out. So they resorted to their secondary guns to fire on the Infanta Maria Theresa. But in turn, the Infanta Maria Theresa is now employing both her primary and secondary batteries to fire at the Brooklyn. And the Brooklyn was hit quite badly. I refer to my paperwork here. Yeah, she was hit by the Infanta Maria Theresa's primary battery. That's resulted in a loss of communications to her engine rooms, which is going to make it difficult for her to change speed. She can still do it, but has to do it on a roll of 1 to 25 on a percentile dice, so it's not going to be easy, but she can still change course. But the Infanta Maria Theresa was hit 5 times by Brooklyn's secondary armament, and the critical hit for her, which is going to be a game changer, was that one of the shells hit the end of her belt, the belt ends at the end of her hull, and destroyed a propeller shaft. So her speed is permanently reduced now to half her original maximum, so she can only travel at 10 knots. So if she limps along like that, she's going to be easily caught up by the chasing Americans and is probably going to be destroyed. Meanwhile, further down here, the Texas and the Cristobal Colon are exchanging fire, and the Cristobal Colon only has secondary guns, but the Texas has also added her secondary guns to the battle. The Texas actually received 5 hits herself from the Cristobal Colon, but fortunately she's so well armoured that the worst effects of the hits were reduced. She has lost a bit of speed. She's lost 3 knots of speed as a result of minor flooding and structural damage and steam leaks and so on. And in return, she managed to get 1 hit on the Cristobal Colon with her primary gun, but she hit her smack in the middle of the hull, the main belt, but the armour there is so thin. This cruiser is much more lightly armoured than the other Spanish cruisers, and the shell had such penetrative ability that it just went straight through the ship without detonating and out the other side. So it caused a bit of damage, but had it detonated inside the ship, that probably would have been game over for the Cristobal Colon anyway. And the Vizcaya there as well is being fired at by the Iowa, and the Iowa managed to get 2 hits on her with her primary guns, and that really didn't have the damaging effect that you might think. The worst hit was on the bridge, where the signals bridge has been destroyed, so she cannot now communicate with the rest of the fleet, and communications with the engine room have also been hampered, so she's going to have the same problem of having to roll 1 to 25 in order to change speed. And further down the field here, exchange of fire between the Almirante Oquendo and the New York with no hits, and the 2 rear ships are travelling quite slowly. What one's that? The Oregon had its view of the Spanish ship there blocked by the New York, so couldn't fire at her, and the Indiana fired with no effect because her fire control systems are so badly affected now anyway, so she managed no result. So very interesting, because these slow ships at the back here do now stand a chance, if the game goes on long enough, to catch up with the Infanta Maria Teresa there. That hit on the propeller shaft there is going to dramatically change the fortunes of the Spanish fleet, I think. On to the next turn. Less happened in that last turn. At the rear end of the chase here, exchange of shots but no hits. No hits on the Iowa or the Vizcaya again between those two. The Cristobal Colon managed one hit on the Texas, hit the superstructure, hardly any damage. And over here the worst damage happened to the Infanta Maria Teresa. The Brooklyn managed to hit her with the primary gun on the starboard side here and took out two of her secondary gun mounts. So her secondary gunfire now on the Brooklyn will be less effective because she's lost two of her 5 guns over this side. But other than that, not much else happened in that turn, so the chase goes on. Right, well that was another eventful turn. Down this end here, the Almirante Kendo has started using her secondary battery to fire at the New York and has switched her primary battery across to fire at the Iowa along with the Vizcaya. But the main action was taking place over here. The Cristobal Colon has managed to do a lot of damage to the Texas now. There are 2 fires raging, and she's temporarily put her second battery out of commission, although that will come back. She's got problems with communication, and one of the fires is close to the main magazine, so there's a possibility, if it's not put out, that the ship will explode. And unfortunately for her, she's down to 1 damage control rating now because the communications have been so badly damaged, so she can only attempt to control one of the fires, which will obviously have to be the more serious one, but then the other one is going to be burning out of control. And over here the Infanta Maria Teresa took an absolute hammering from the Brooklyn. 1 shell damaged her primary turret, which would have required it to be repaired, but then another shell caused a fire in the magazine supplying that turret, so the magazine was flooded, meaning the forward primary gun turret is permanently out of action now. And what else? Oh yeah, there's so much structural damage on her that all the secondary gun mounts on her starboard side, which are close together in one section, have all been silenced. So she can only bring to bear now the 1 primary gun on the Brooklyn. So really bad news. And also the Texas is reduced in speed even further. So quite a lot of damage up this end. Well, the last turn was incidentful to say the least. The Indiana, which is really beginning to lose distance now, that's the closest ship there, the Admiral Kendo, has finally just managed to get 1 lucky shot in across that distance, and she struck the Kendo's superstructure, and the shell passed straight through, so not a great deal of damage, but at least she's managed to get a blow. And the Vizcaya has taken a direct hit on the main belt from the Iowa. She now has 2 fires raging, one of which is quite serious, and just for the next turn alone there's a 15% chance that that fire will detonate the ship's magazine and destroy the ship. The Texas is also burning and listing to starboard quite heavily now, and she has no damage control passes available at the moment. After next turn she'll get back 1, but the seriousness of the fires is that one of them, unless it's extinguished, every turn has a 4% chance of destroying the ship. So, and also she's losing even more speed now, so not a happy situation for her. The Infanta Maria Teresa is fighting the fire. It's reduced in severity but still burning, and her speed is never going to recover because of that propeller shaft damage. So she is being caught slowly by the rest of the American fleet, and the Brooklyn here is surviving at the moment, hasn't taken any further hits from the Infanta Maria Teresa. In fact, there is only 1 gun on board the Spanish ship now that can even fire at the Brooklyn, so the Brooklyn is relatively safe. But it's turning into an epic battle, and in terms of game simulated time, half an hour has gone by now. The actual historical battle took about 4 hours up till the destruction of the last Spanish ship. So from that respect, it's following history fairly accurately, I would say. The major difference is that the Spanish gunnery is far more effective, even though I gave it much lower factors than the American squadrons. But they've certainly done a lot more damage to the Americans, particularly the poor old Texas there. So, next turn. Right, so the Brooklyn and the Infanta Maria Teresa have begun to turn for different reasons. The Infanta Maria Teresa is not going to escape, and so she's turned around so that the remaining guns she has can come to bear on a target. As it was, she couldn't actually fire at the Brooklyn any longer, and she's not going to get past her. So best thing to do was to go back and try and help the rest of the fleet. And the Brooklyn has turned around. She can turn a lot more sharply. She actually managed a 90-degree turn. She's going back simply to remain in the battle because she's pulling away from it at the moment. The Infanta Maria Teresa managed to put the fire out on board, so that's some good news. And there were no primary battery hits in this turn, but there were a few secondary battery hits. The Brooklyn managed to continue to pound the Infanta Maria Teresa. The Vizcaya scored some more hits on the Texas, and the Texas is in real trouble now. Her speed has slowed even more. The slower she goes, the easier a target she is. She no longer has any damage control. The possibility of getting back 1 damage control point has now been removed, so the fires are going to rage unattended. Sometimes in these wars they do put themselves out, but it's unlikely. So I think the Texas is going to have to try and withdraw from the battle somehow. I'm contemplating whether she should run herself aground or turn to port and try and do a 180-degree turn and head back towards Guantanamo Bay. I'm not sure. I suspect the latter, actually. What else happened? Not much else. The Vizcaya has managed to reduce the fires on board her, but they're still both burning. But she did survive the possibility of a magazine explosion, so that won't crop up again. And the Admiral Akendo was struck a couple of times by secondary batteries from the New York, but again there wasn't much damage done, just general damage. And that was that turn. That turn was very dramatic. I decided that the Texas has got no chance of getting back to safety, so the captain has struck the Texas's colours and she's heading towards the beach with the fires out of control, although one has diminished slightly, but the other one has increased. So that meant that on top of the Texas no longer really being a necessary target for the Spanish, she's also blocking the view of a lot of the other ships for the Americans, so there's been a massive amount of readjusting of targets, but nevertheless, despite the fact you have to reacquire your target when you do that, there has been a number of notable hits despite the penalties. Starting over here, the Infanta Maria Teresa managed to hit the Iowa with her secondary guns, and the Iowa has now received just enough points to go over a damaged tier, and when she tested, there is temporary flooding of one of her propeller shafts, meaning her speed for the next turn will be reduced, but she'll get that back the turn after that. The Infanta Maria Teresa was struck by both the Brooklyn's primary and secondary armaments, and she's lost even more speed now. She's down to 8 knots. What else happened to her? Oh yeah, she's also now lost all her secondary armament on the port side, so she's left with just one turret, primary gun turret. The Vizcaya is in real trouble as well now. Her speed is reducing. The fires are still burning, although they're being reduced, but they're causing further damage to the ship now, and her speed is reducing, and her damage control is disrupted, so she won't be able to fight the fires next turn. And she's also got some compartment flooding. The worst problems really were for the Admiral Akendo, though. She was struck by a primary shell from the Iowa, and her rear turret, the shell could easily have passed through because the armour on her rear turret's quite thin, but the shell detonated as it passed through the turret, destroyed the gun and the turret, and the ammunition fire is quite serious, and her speed is dropping as well. And I think she's listing as well, if I remember. Yeah, she's listing to starboard, and the secondary guns on that side, not that she's using them at the moment, can't be fired any further anymore. And she's also lost the fire control system to her remaining primary guns, so that's the effectiveness of that is going to be seriously reduced. So quite a dramatic turn. There's still a couple of American ships trailing behind here, but given the fact that the Spanish ships are beginning to lose speed now quite significantly, all except the Cristobal Colon, there is a chance that they're going to get back into the battle. Well, the battle is definitely beginning to turn in the Americans' favour now. Their superior gunnery skills are really beginning to tell. Starting over here with the Brooklyn, that scored 2 hits on the Infanta Maria Theresa, but she was lucky not to receive any specific damage from those 2 hits, and she's not quite past the next damage tier yet, so she soaked those 2 hits up. And the Cristobal Colon is trying to sneak off, relatively unscathed at the moment, but over here the Vizcaya wasn't able to control the fires, and one of those has doubled in size, so even though she hasn't been struck by any shells this turn, she is suffering. The Texas is now flooding. Both her engine rooms are flooded, so she's come to a stop in the water, and that I'm not quite sure what to do in respect of the Almirante Oquendo, which is heading straight forward, but as I was saying on a previous episode, the scale of these models way exceeds ranges and distances. They're 1/1500th scale models, and I'm playing according to 1/18,000th scale movement, so the ship represents a massive area, and in fact in 1/18,000th scale it would be much smaller, so I think I'm simply going to let the Admiral Oquendo sail past her, move the models on the table, and the Texas isn't going to make it to the beach now. She's either going to, the fires are either going to go out or she's going to sink where she is. And the Iowa scored 2 direct hits with her primary weaponry on the Admiral Oquendo. Both detonated inside the ship, and her primary, she has no primary weaponry any longer, and is in serious trouble. Is reducing speed still further. So it's kind of playing out a bit like the historic battle. The tail-ending ship of the Spanish, the Admiral Oquendo, was pummeled in exactly that way. So it looks like the combined guns of all these American ships here are going to finish her off quite rapidly. And the Infanta Maria Theresa here is doomed, really. The Vizcaya is not doing very well at all, so it's turning into the historical situation where the Cristobal Colon used its superior speed to get away. So we'll see what happens. Well, as you can see, the Infanta Maria Theresa has just been destroyed. A shell from the Brooklyn struck one of her gun turrets, detonated, and the explosion communicated with the ship's magazine. So the ship is destroyed now. Excuse me. The Vizcaya's fires, despite the crew's attempts to fight them, are deteriorating, but she's still moving along at fairly good speed. The Cristobal Colon is still attempting to escape, moving at maximum speed, and the Admiral Oquendo is suffering. She's now had a propeller shaft destroyed by a hit, which means that her maximum speed is now only 10 knots, so she's in a similar situation to the previous situation of the Infanta Maria Theresa. The New York has lost an engine room through flooding, but luckily she's got 4 engine rooms in total, so the loss of one is only going to reduce her maximum speed by 2 knots. And the crew of the Texas decided to abandon ship. They can't fight the fires, they can't fire the guns. it's best to get off it whilst it's still floating, so it's now abandoned and motionless. And that's the end of that turn. So in that turn, both the Iowa and the Brooklyn had to change target because the Infanta Maria Theresa has now disappeared. So the Brooklyn is firing on the Cristobal Colon and the Iowa is firing on the Vizcaya. Neither of them scored any hits, so that was mainly the result of changing target. You suffer a penalty for that. And in return, neither of these two ships have scored a hit. Both of them fired at the Brooklyn. The New York and the Almirante Kendo have been exchanging a lot of fire. The Almirante Kendo is coming off the worst for that, in that now all her guns are silenced. She is absolutely silent, so basically just needs to try and get away. Excuse me. The New York, however, has been taking a lot of hits around the waterline, and the accumulated damage from that has resulted in a list, I think, to port, and one of her prop shafts flooded, so her speed is down to a maximum of 10 knots now. So it's quite significant because she was one of the fastest ships, so now it's up to the Brooklyn really. That's the only one that's got a maximum speed of 20 knots to attempt to catch or keep up with the Cristobal and destroy her. The Vizcaya's fires are diminishing and one of them was put out. The fires on the Texas are growing, but she's just a floating wreck now, so eventually that will destroy her, but she's still afloat at the moment. And that was the end of that turn. Well, in that turn, the Admiral Oquendo decided to turn to starboard and try and get to the beach and beach herself. She can't fire any of her guns now, and the New York is pretty battered. She's still firing at the Spanish ship and managed to damage the bridge and kill the captain, but she's listing so badly at the end of that turn that her guns are going to be very hard to fire from now on. There's such a penalty on them, so while there's nothing else going on aboard her, and she's moving so slowly, I think she's going to turn around now and get back to port for repairs, so she's going to drop out the battle. The Texas, there's just a raging inferno aboard her now. The crew have long since abandoned her, and the watertight bulkheads are beginning to go, so she should sink fairly soon. And there are two American ships, the Oregon and the Indiana, trailing behind, both travelling very slowly, so they're not matching the speed of these two Spanish ships here, so they're likely to drop out the battle as well. So it's going to come down to a chase between these two American ships and the excuse me, these two Spanish ships. The one that's in the real trouble at the moment is the Vizcaya. They're trying to fight the fire. It's diminishing slowly, but it's still quite a sizable fire aboard her. So it's looking very much like the course of the actual battle at the moment, because in the actual battle the Infanta Maria Theresa was the first ship destroyed, or the first main ship destroyed, and that's happened. Then the Admiral Oquendo, and that seems to be happening. And then the Vizcaya came to grief third, followed by the Cristobal Colon that nearly got away, and that seems to be history repeating itself in that respect. So I'm quite impressed with how the walls are matching history. The biggest difference, of course, being that the Americans are taking quite a pounding. It's a much more even fight than the actual historical battle. So we'll carry on and see what happens, but it's probably going to concentrate on these 4 ships up here now. So in the last turn, then the Iowa, in the top middle of the screen there, fired a shell which struck the burning Vizcaya, but passed right through again. It hit the belt end where there's no armour, and it was over penetrative, so it went straight through, didn't detonate, caused a little bit of general damage. The Vizcaya's fire is slowly being got under control, but still burning fairly fiercely, and she's, because of that slight damage, she's lost another couple of knots of speed, but that was about it. The Texas burning over there is now in danger of sinking. Every turn that goes by there's a 10% chance that she'll go under. The fire on the Almirante Kendo has been put out by the crew, but to no avail now really, because they are heading powerless towards the shore here. The captain's killed, the bridge is knocked out at the moment, they can't change course this turn anyway, and if they would stay afloat it would just mean capture, so they're going to do the same thing as the ship did historically and beach themselves, and they still are under fire. Both the Oregon and the Indiana do have a clear view of the ship now, so they're just taking shots as the ship moves across their front, and that was about it for that time.